the title is always my titles are always long. The figure of JR has been explored 2 times already today. So Massimo, we should invite him to give us a speech, because in some way he's an isotopy of our symposium today. What I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about 2 movies. These 2 movies, The Written Face is a Swiss movie shot in Japan in 1995. And I see there is something in the chat, sorry. Okay. And the second one is Visage by Agnès and JR, shot in 2017. And unfortunately, after 1 or 2 years after this movie, Varda died. So these 2 movies are interesting to me because they both talk about faces, and they both talk about faces in a strange cultural way. So they don't only talk about faces in order to represent them or describe them, and in some way they propose a philosophy and also, I think, a semiotics of faces. What I think is that through these movies and through other movies, we can extrapolate a kind of a facial ethnosemiotics based on a basic question, which is how can we think face as a vehicle or as a sign of a culture or of certain cultures? So the problem is to define this strange thing, which is immediately connected to the concept of semiosphere, but that we call face sphere, which is a concept already mentioned by Massimo in some occasions in the past, and I think it's a concept we can explore. Also because if we think of a face sphere, of course we have to, in a certain way, deny the idea by Emmanuel Levinas that face is something singular. Of course, faces are singular, but in some way they share some trait. So how can we work between these 2 dimensions? An idea is to take the ancient idea of the dichotomy of nature culture. Of course, this dichotomy is clearly overpassed by a semiotic and anthropological tradition, but it's useful to try to read faces both as a kind of mix, as a kind of interpolation between accident, so something which is given by nature, and intention, so something which is superimposed by culture. And so by starting from this point, we can, through faces, have access to lots of cultures, because another important thing to say, and it's very obvious to you, is that the word culture, of course, is a word very complex with not a singular meaning. So through faces and through faces in these movies, we have access to cultures of places, to cultures of genders, to cultures of ages, of social classes, of work, of arts, of times, and so on and so forth. The 2 images you see in this slide are the one on the top taken from the movie Visage, and we immediately see another installation by JR, and we know him. And the second one is from the movie The Written Face, Le Visage écrit. So the first question we could ask ourselves is how many faces we see in these pictures. This is related to, for example, the idea Gabriele proposed about a kind of idea of face as a multi-layered, a stratified device, where every layer superimposes itself on the previous one, but doesn't deny the previous one. And every layer can be read as a kind of cultural layer, so we can have different cultures on a singular face. So, for example, in the second picture, the common sense should answer that there is only one visible face. but at least we see two different phases, because there is the natural phase of the actor Tamasaburō, who is a Japanese actor specialized in kabuki theater and specialized precisely in the roles of onagata. Onagata is a male actor who plays female roles in kabuki theater. And this is a very well codified practice in Japanese kabuki theater. And the second phase is, of course, the made-up phase, it's the strongly made-up phase. And these two phases share the same visual space, the same somatic space, but they represent two different cultural instances, and we can find more of them. And in the first image, of course, we see in a very tiny space the natural face of Janine, one of the characters of Visage Village, and then in the background her faces in a kind of blow up, a sort of gigantographia. So the three protagonists of these movies are three different persons. The first one is Agnès Varda. Agnès Varda is a very well-known, was a very well-known French director. The second one is JR. And this is the first image we can see him by looking at his face. And the third one is a representation of Tamasaburō, the Japanese actor I was talking about. So there are three different faces with three different cultures. But we will go on this further. So Visage Village, as I said, can be schematically read as the story of a casual encounter between these two artists, which come from different eras and who decide to share an adventure. So they want to travel together in the French countryside, visiting little villages with their respective bodies and respective gazes. As I said, Varda is an international renowned director, representative of the Nouvelle Vague. She was a forerunner of feminist cinema, and also she worked both in fictional and documentary movies. And her face constitutes an icon, because if we see her self-representation, for example, in this beautiful image, symmetrical image, we see that the bob haircut, this kind of, in Italian is caschetto, constitute, if we want, something like the Hitler's mustache. JR, again, works on visual culture. Someone said that he is an urban artivist. He takes up some elements of the culture of graffiti writing and reinterprets them through the photographic medium. And the face is his privileged subject. And again, his face is iconic because he always exposes himself with the sunglasses and with the hat. Varda, in a dialogue in the movie, says that his sunglasses reminds her the memory of Jean-Luc Godard. And through this road trip, because it's also a road trip movie, they discover invisible realities in the French countryside. And they do not only discover this reality, but they rewrite these realities. How? By putting giant faces into the walls of the places they visit. So this is a typical operation of urban gamification. This is a matter of Matteo Ball. There is this idea of the forces of images, which is an idea Maria Giulia knows very well. And the idea is that the face represents a kind of meta-cultural trans-surface. So what is the isotopy of the movie? Of course, the isotopy of the movie is that of the face, and we can see it right from the title, Visage Village or Visages Villages. Here there is, of course, an assonance, a very clear assonance, but also a semantic rhyme. And the artistic operation made up is based on the power of the face that is expressed in a strange crossroads between photography and landscape. And the key is the blow up. And this is very interesting because we, in the last year, we talked a lot about modification of faces, for example, inserting elements on faces, morphing faces, deepfake, and so on. But we didn't speak a lot about how also the dimension of the face as a gestalt can modify the perception of it. So the same face in a tiny picture or in a giant wall has a different meaning. And this is related to the quantity of the signifier. And also there is, of course, a phenomenological reflection on being icons and producing icons. In fact, the film begins in the opening credits as a cartoon and then becomes live action. Of course, we can explore it by asking ourselves what kind of sign the face represents in this theoretical framework. My idea is that the reflection is that the face is a strange sign because more than other signs has on it the three components of the classical Persian sign. So it is an icon, of course, but also an index, but also a symbol. And this is very clear if we look at how they use the archival footage in the movie. This is really connected to some Roland Barthes ideas. Of course, we cannot but mention La Chambre Claire, because there is inside this book a strong reflection as photography as a micro experience of death. But again, this reflection is usually associated with the medial dimension of photography. Well, I think that the point is the textual dimension of the photography, and especially the fact that we are talking about photographies of faces and not of feet or of legs and so on and so forth. Yeah, I just want to show you, for example, one passage, the passage of Janine La Résistane, with an old woman who lives in this old abandoned village. Once upon a time, it was full of miners, and then she's the last inhabitant of this village, and she doesn't want to abandon it because she thinks it is important to stay there and to preserve the memory of the place through her own body and through her own face. And we see how J.R. and Barda create their air giant image. So I stop the sharing on the screen and I try to share the video. You should see it, and I hope you can listen it too. You cannot hear it. Sorry, but you can read the subtitle. Okay. Okay, I can stop it because it was interesting to see how she cries by looking at herself in this new dimension and with this new very strong resemantization of her face by putting it onto a wall. I go back to the slides. Of course, we already talked about JR. If you want to explore and to go deep into his work, I strongly advise you to look at this website, Inside Out Project. Here you can have the examples of how through faces we can make art. One thing already Silvia mentioned it. It's interesting that these faces are different from normal photographies, because usually normal photographies are on really smooth surfaces, while here we have always rough, spurious surfaces. So it's something like the wrinkles of the faces which go and adhere to the wrinkles of the surfaces. So probably the poetics is that is not that the world becomes a face, but the face that become the world. Here we have other things we can mention. Lots of semiotic frames can analyze this movie. I personally appreciate the idea of the meaning of remains, il senso dei resti, which Massimo proposed in an ancient era, so in 2012. Also the idea of semantic of ruins. I'm trying to work also in this semio-aesthetic of wreckage by utilizing another movie, El Automata. This is a movie from Cuba by Alejandro Perez, where these Cuban artists take basically rubbish and transform it into faces. So the idea that through faces as a semiotic device, you can give again life to dead inert materials. And I want to show you another passage. This passage is very, very strong because we have a quadruple analogical switch to a peculiar point of face, because we all agree that we perceive face as a whole, but then we also know that by a phenomenological and also by an artistic perspective, eyes are something more, are an important point. Also experiments proved it. And here we see this passage through 4 different eyes, all dedicated to the figure of Agnès Varda, who was a director, so who dedicated her life in order to see the world and to make her gaze of the world visible to the others. And Varda, at the end of her life, was had a problem with her eyes. She saw the world in a very faded way. So all this idea of seeing the world is quite interesting. I heard something, I don't know what it was, but again, I share the video. So the first part is Varda at, and JR at a fish market. And then we see how from the eye of the fish, we go to the eye of Varda, and then to the eyes on the necklace of Varda, and then to the eye of the Chien Andalou, one of the most famous movies by Buñuel. This was a very famous scene by Buñuel, and it's interesting. This path, this very fast, quick path from the dead eye of the fish to the ill eye of Varda to the.
Bruno, now we can hear you a little bit.
And again to the artifact of the eye in a movie, an eye which is broken, which is destroyed.
Bruno?
Ci senti?
I know the sound is not good, Maria Giulia, sorry. I don't know where the problem is.
No, your own voice, yeah. After you showed this, if you could repeat what you said after you showed this sequence.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, now it's okay.
Okay, sorry, because I have only one earphone. No, I said that it's interesting the path that the movie proposed, because we have the dead eye of the fish, and then the ill eye of Barda, which is an isolated eye because we see there is the cover of the face, and then the artifact of the eyes in the necklace Barda wears, and then again an artifact of the eye, which is a cinematographic eye, a very famous cinematographic eye, and it's an eye destroyed by a razor. So this part is very interesting, but I have no time to go more inside this idea, but for the publication, of course, I will dedicate lots of time on it. Then I go to the second movie because my time is running out, as the popular English rock band Muse would say. So I go back to the slides. The second one is the Visage. The first question I ask myself is why this movie is called the written face and not the painted face, because factually Tamasaburō paints his face. The answer is closer than you can think, because if you remember the very famous book by Roland Barthes, The Empire of Science, I reread the book when I was doing this research. In the book, there is a specific chapter called The Written Face, and we can find the clear explanation on this idea of writing besides of painting faces. We know that writing is a more different, more complicated operation than painted if we speak in the meta language of semiotics. But this book by Barthes is interesting, and I didn't remember it because it's full of faces, and face is the real isotopy of the book. These are the first lines of the book, where Barthes says that there are images in the book, but these images have not glosses, have not explanations, because they want to represent how Barthes felt while this trip in Japan. And Barthes says, text and image interlacing seeks to ensure the circulation and exchange of these signifiers, body, face, writing, and in them to read the retreat of science. So it's interesting, Barthes talks about body, face, and writing. Then we have other passage where face is really important. As I said, this chapter, fundamental. Also another chapter dedicated to the eyelid, so with the specific peculiarity of the eyes. And so this idea in the written face, it's a really rare movie. You cannot watch it unless you pay for a Swiss database. I paid to watch it, 5 Swiss francs to watch this movie. And all the movie is dedicated to the preparation Tamasaburō Bando does in order to transform itself into a female character in Kabuki theater. We have long sequences. Here you have the screenshots of one of the first, where we see the uncovered face of Tamasaburō, and then with a zoom in movement, a selective movement, we see how his face becomes something different. So the superimposition of this white, strong makeup, and so on and so forth. So we can ask, again, lots of things. Why is a white face? Of course, the white is a non-color, so there is this idea of cancellation, but we know that white in Japan has a specific symbolicity, so it's related to mourning. But as I said, it's not only a cancellation, it's more a superimposition, an overlap, a crisis. And we see that after this cancellation or a half cancellation, there is the assumption of archetypally female features. So there is, through a somatic operation, a switch in subjectivity, a kind of wearing something in our faces is also wearing a different subjectivity. And it's interesting because there is a great sign of emancipation in this idea in Kabuki theater, the idea that a male who acts a woman role can in some way represent femininity, sometimes better than a woman herself. Also, there is this presence of the mirror. Massimo already talked about mirrors, which are strong devices, and also Umberto Eco talked about them, and not only this idea that there is a full awareness, but also a detachment from the self. So there is this spatial ecology, which represent a kind of human landscape, which is in the movie directly connected also with a urban and cultural landscape. Also, the idea of writing one space can be explored through other direction. For example, all the matter related to tattoos. And this is interesting because through the writings of faces, we usually demarcate semiospheres. Here, for example, I had the occasion to study some Melville's novels, and how Melville concentrated the description of Maoris by emphasizing their faces and their tattoos. This is quite interesting, for example, in one of the first pages of Moby Dick's, when we have the first encounter with Queequeg, the harpooner, with a really strongly tattooed man, and immediately there is this idea of otherness related to his written face. This is a matter of anthropology. Here you have some of the bibliography we can utilize in order to explore the theme, but also it's a matter of semiotics, because it is related to the transformation of our representation of ourselves. So we start from a body. This is the body of Tamasaburō. Then we put on it mask, and this body is overlapped with the role, social role, artistic role of Onagata. Then we go into practices, again, for example, doing kabuki theater, and here we are creating this idea of a semiosphere. How can we detach the structure? And I'm concluding my presentation. We can detach it from this movie in similar way. I just try to expose some of them in a very disordered way, but it's a kind of program, this presentation, more than a finished presentation. It's an idea that face is related to naturalness, and that mask can create a new naturalness. We see in the movie some basic equivalents. We are used to think of, for example, if you think of Goffman, this distance, this disconnection between upon and beyond the scenes, while these are strictly connected through faces. We know that Goffman created a wonderful theory of faces. And then I finish. So I think I stayed in my time. So thank you very much.